Welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We are up to episode 55, and we're in the Gospel of Mark, which puts us at Mark chapter 5. Again, great to have you. Great to be studying with you again. Anything you want to say before we get started?
No, a few minutes ago he asked me if I was happy, and I said no. And he asked me why. I just feel like Satan has gotten me multiple times today in like multiple different ways.
Yeah.
And taken like good things, like good opportunities or good whatever, and like turned them around on me.
Yeah.
And I got turned them into big bummers.
So, objectively, not actually bad things, but affected the way that you felt about those things?
Yeah, like I just got into like a mental like tailspin on like two totally separate issues that were both like really good things. And the thing is, I have done the same thing, or I've let him do to me the same thing, in the same exact way with different / similar issues multiple times over the years. Like, it's just funny how we don't really make him work that hard. Like, it's just, I'm always falling for the same things.
It would be, right, if it was a different, circumstantially, if it was a different issue, it'd be the same outcome because it's the same enemy trying to do this, accomplish the same.
Yeah, it also just exposes the same, like, weak areas or idols that I have. Mm-hmm. Like, it's always the same things.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing. It's also a good reminder. So, like, I asked you if you wanted to film another study, and you said, yes, I do. I asked you how you were doing. You said, not good, or I asked you if you're happy. And
you said, are you happy?
Do you want to talk about it? And you said, well, let's start rolling first.
Well, yesterday I was really happy. Like, I had a really tough but good week at clinical, and it was so nice to be off yesterday. And I just thought I just had a really good day, and then today good things happened, and yet I think I described it earlier as like a mental tailspin that I get in, where like he just plants or like something. He just whispers like one thought in my head, and then I take it and take it and take it and take it, which that part's on me. And again, I know I've done it with similar issues before in the same way, so I should know better, but I'm stuck in that Abraham loop.
Yeah, so but it's part of the exercise piece of it. Is one of the reasons why we do these Bible studies is not so that you necessarily learn something new every time, although I'm hoping that you're learning stuff along the way. It's not just that, well, I got to put in my time each day as, whatever before God. It's that you're like exercising these spiritual muscles. And again, we do the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the concept, right? And these are part of your 2 steps forward, the spiritual discipline of studying God's word together. And what that does, the analogy that I'll often give is like when you hear the same promises from God, not like new things necessarily, but the same promises from God. He loves you, he forgives you, he provides for you, he protects you, he has a place prepared for you in heaven. You've heard that before, but when you hear it again, it's like turning the screw one more time. And again, the analogy I use is like bolting down your patio furniture. Because at some point in time, storms come. And when the storms come, that stuff is going to go flying unless you actually screw it down. You have to, and so like God's promises again and again are just like sinking it. And then ultimately what you want is no matter what this world throws at you, because it will throw stuff at you, you just don't want your patio furniture flying everywhere. And so like that's part of why we do this. You don't just study when you're feeling good. You don't just study when you're feeling bad. You study every day, because that allows you to humbly deal with the good, and it allows you to boldly and courageously deal with the bad.
Well, and to be honest, so we took a week off
Of recording.
Yeah. So I didn't read my Bible that week, and now I've cried like 6 times today, or felt like I was going to.
Yeah. It's it is most definitely, which is, by the way, I don't get that from this is fascinating to me, and I can only say this from a pastoral perspective because I don't think, as far as I know, not everybody has these conversations regularly. I do not hear people say when they start up a devotional life or a Bible study life, okay, I studied today, and now I felt great and had a great day. What I hear people say is when they do it for a while and they stop, They sense something terrible is missing, and they've lost some control and stability. So, like, it just goes to show how, again, this organic nature of building up the spiritual muscles by regular daily disciplines of Bible study and prayer.
Yeah. I have not heard that patio furniture analogy.
Really, that's one of my favorites.
I like it. Yeah, I'm just amazed you have an analogy I haven't heard. Did you make it up?
That's hurtful, and yes, I
And
did make
if
that
you
up.
don't
And
have a
that's
good...
also, whenever you say it was good, and did you come up with that, it leads me to believe that you assume that anything that I have that's good is just perjured, or not
And-
perjured, plagiarized from wherever.
To add on to that, if you don't have a good foundation to screw your furniture down into...
I have no idea where you're going with this.
Yeah, you can't screw it into sinking sand.
Oh.
You have to have a good spiritual foundation.
Well, you're kind of mixing the metaphors.
Jesus.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, on that note, let us begin. Mark chapter 5. Make sure to read through your copy at home. Here is my summary for the chapter. Starts out with the story of Jesus healing a demonized man, which is a fascinating thing to think about. We've talked about the supernatural realm a number of times. It says Jesus and his disciples traveled across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. A possessed man who lived in the tombs there came to meet Jesus. No one could change him due to his almost supernatural strength. He cried out and cut himself frequently, and when he saw Jesus, the possessed man ran and fell at Jesus' feet, and the demon cried out that Jesus, please not torture him right now. The demon also called Jesus Son of the Most High God, and Jesus asked the demon his name, and the demon said, I am Legion, for we are many. Legion referring to like thousands of, like an army of demons. The demon begged not to be cast out of that region, and Jesus agreed and instead cast the demons into a nearby herd of 2,000 pigs who proceeded to run down a steep bank and into the lake and drown. The men tending the pigs told everybody in the town, and the townspeople came to Jesus, saw the formerly demon-possessed man doing well, and then they begged Jesus to leave the area, which is interesting. The cured man wanted to follow Jesus, but instead Jesus had the man go and tell his friends and his family in the Decapolis, which is a group of 10 or so cities, essentially to the east of the Sea of Galilee. It doesn't come up very often in the Gospels, but that's whenever you hear the Decapolis, it's a group of cities east of the North Sea of Galilee. So the man essentially goes about, he wanted to go with Jesus, but he essentially goes about evangelizing to those cities, and the people there were amazed. After crossing back to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus was met by a synagogue ruler named Jairus. He mentioned how sick his daughter was. Jairus begged Jesus to come to his home so that the daughter could be cured. And while this transpired, a huge crowd had started to gather around Jesus. And a woman who had, she's described as having been bleeding for 12 years, made her way to the front just to try to touch the cloak of Jesus, hoping that he might cure her. And when she did touch Jesus, she was, in fact, cured. He felt some power go out from him, and he asked, where did that come from? You know, who touched my cloak? The woman, trembling, fell at Jesus' feet, and Jesus told her that her faith had healed her, that she should now live in peace. Some of the men from Jairus' house, remember, this is all traveling to Jairus, the synagogue ruler's house, to cure the sick daughter, and this whole event happens along the way. Meanwhile, some men from that house come to Jesus and inform Jesus that Jairus' daughter is already dead, so Jesus didn't need to come. Jesus told Jairus simply to believe, and they continue to make their way to the house. When he arrived with Peter, James, and John, Jesus announced that the crowd didn't need to mourn any longer, for the girl was merely asleep. Everybody laughed at that. And when Jesus got into the 12-year-old girl's room, he grabbed her by the hand and said, "Little girl, get up." She immediately arose and walked around, and he told the family not to tell anyone, but to get her something to eat. There's our summary for Mark chapter 5. Mm-hmm. Anything immediately strike you?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but maybe I should just let you do that.
I'm going to start with the devotional thoughts, and
Yeah.
you can kind of interject there. Okay. So devotional thought number 1, we're going to call it the reality of being demonized. Again, we've touched on this supernatural issue a couple of different times. A few other spots in the Bible that I would point to. 1 Timothy 3 in 1 Timothy 3, the Apostle Paul says that if you become proud, you fall into the devil's trap. In Ephesians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul says that if you don't forgive people, if you hold a grudge, you give the devil a foothold. Point being, throughout the New Testament, writers are constantly writing like this. And so my question for you then is, do you think that the devil is not constantly trying to influence you all the time? And as you testified to just a second ago, like this is the negative attitudes, negative feelings, negative thought processes are very often us listening to the lies of Satan that he's trying to convince us of in life. And therefore, I think when we talk about the issue of a guy who is demonized, I think it sounds so far-fetched to a lot of modern people, but I think we should look at it as, for instance, us, like the difference between him and us is not so much an issue of quality, like he was demonized and I wasn't, but maybe perhaps an issue of quantity. He had like thousands, and you and I maybe have a couple that are constantly roaming around getting us with some of the same types of things.
Yeah. I think I have talked before about how sometimes I get the grumps. That's the best way to describe it. There's no other way to describe it. It's like irrational feelings of happy to irritable, but in an extreme way. And I never used to think that this, but I used to just think like, oh, my mood isn't very well regulated, or something.
Yeah.
But now I definitely think that is like Satan's doing, and it feels so terrible. And sometimes you'll say to me like, "You're acting like this," and I'm like, "Do you think I want to though?"
Right.
Like because I feel terrible when I'm in this state. So like, just imagine how this guy felt all the time.
Right.
Like it must have just been horrific.
Which, again, it's when we talk about, I'm not crazy about the term demon possession, because then it sounds like there's a demon inside that's just pulling levers on him, and almost he has no control. That's not the case. When we see demon possession in the New Testament, that doesn't seem to be like the case. Again, it's not somebody with their little girls with their heads spinning around, vomiting on priests and stuff like that. It seems to be somebody who, like this guy has a lot of demons, admittedly, but it seems to be somebody who simply, like to some extent, cannot control their behavior and has become socially recluse, social recluse as a result of that. And therefore, I would ask somebody to think along the lines of, okay, think about various issues in your life, unhealthy behaviors. And I jotted a couple down here. Anger issues, eating issues, body consciousness issues, sexual issues, drinking issues, money issues. Any issues in your life that you have attempted to, like people will say, I tried to restrain myself. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, but they can't seem to fully get a handle on it. I'm like, okay, does that suggest to you that there's maybe something, a power that is bigger than you that is currently trying to influence you? Now, the reality is, for the believer, God says that, I will, I've placed my spirit in you, and my spirit will allow you to overcome those types of things. But in and of yourself, when you can't overcome your flesh, does it not make sense that there might be some kind of demonic forces attached to some of that? And again, I think part of the explanation, I'm not saying the entire explanation, because I mean, when you're talking about a number of different things, addiction, psychological issues, obviously we are like, there is such a thing as brain chemistry, even though we don't understand it very well right now. There are issues like when you get hypoglycemic or low blood sugar or whatever.
That's not a thing. I've told you so many times.
I know you've told me that.
For an average healthy person, that does not happen.
I will continue. Point being, okay, so the hangry thing. When you don't eat for a while, something is going on, whatever it is, whatever label you want to do, where people get irritable. In fact, I've referenced an article before by which one of the things that was said is people who are really irritable, if they eat something, like 80% of them within 15 minutes will not be irritable anymore.
Yeah, that's just a sugar craving, but I understand your point.
Okay, it's a withdrawal or whatever. But like my point is, it's not to just say all my behaviors are the product of demons around me would not be right. To say
Yeah.
that all my bad behaviors are simply because I have willfully chosen of my own, and I'm my own self-determinist person, and everything that I do is simply the product of me choosing, which is a very secularized, materialistic view of the universe, which a lot of modern American people have. That also cannot be true because it doesn't account for the whole concept of I want to do different, but I don't seem to be able to muster up the power to do so.
Yeah, I feel like I am constantly demonized. Like, yes, a demon can't enter me because the Holy Spirit lives in the place he would enter. Unlike this man, but yes, I feel like there are always constantly demons trying to get at me. So, like for you, I think what you're saying too though is like obviously your depression has a genetic component because it wouldn't improve then with medication.
I've tried everything. Like, so I shouldn't say everything. I know there's various therapies and stuff that I haven't, but from a pharmaceutical standpoint, from a cognitive behavioral therapy standpoint, from a health and wellness and sleep and all that standpoint.
The whole 30 did not cure your depression?
No, it only made me more angry. From a spiritual standpoint, like all those things factor in without question. But there are other things attached to it,
Yeah.
you know, and so which is one of the reasons why I think the Bible is so fascinatingly nuanced on all this stuff. But the point is the idea that modern people will sometimes look at a story like this and say like, oh, it can't be because, well, no, it can't be in your mind because you have a materialistic bias of the universe.
Yeah.
And actually, your materialistic worldview does not account for all of your own behaviors. So maybe like start to doubt some of your presuppositions about the way the universe works. One other thing I want to mention on this is because it gets brought up, and I remember I preached on this a couple years ago. Which, by the way, I always also want to put a plug in here. Some of this stuff I've covered before in sermons in greater detail than what I can do in a 20, 30-minute episode, but. If you look for St. Marcus MKE on iTunes or Google Play, you can find all the sermon archive stuff there. But one of the questions that came up after I preached on this was people asking, what about those poor pigs? You know, like the destruction of 2,000 pigs. And which is interesting because, okay, that was what the townspeople were upset about. When they came out.
From a monetary standpoint.
Yes. When they came out. So there's this guy that's like notoriously demon possessed. He's like this town crazy guy. Can't be chained, can't be like the fact that they even wanted to chain him was, whatever. But the townspeople, there's all these pigs here in this, whatever, some farmer's land, and the demons get cast in them. They go and they're ruined, and people in the town hear about it and they're concerned about the money of it. It doesn't say that one person is concerned about the fact that, oh, this guy that was tortured and demon possessed, he's healed. How wonderful. No one says that. The only thing people think about is, oh man, number one, those poor pigs. And really more than the poor pigs, they're thinking, oh, we lost all that money. And it just goes to show like what our natural instincts, what we care about. The financial loss versus the human life.
Right.
And
Right.
there's probably a lot more we could talk about
Yeah.
right now regarding all that stuff and social unrest and that sort of thing. But point is, the idea that this guy experiences this tremendous relief, and furthermore, you say, well, why does Jesus cast him into pigs and stuff? Remember, this is part of the promised land. And remember, according to Jewish law, there were not supposed to be no pigs there anyways, because they were forbidden according to Jewish dietary restrictions. Part of what Jesus is saying here is this was always intended to be the land of my people. And for those who clearly have defied God's laws in the process, my will is going to be done eventually, whether you hop on board with it or not. So that's part of what Jesus is I think proclaiming through all this. But, all right, anything else on the demons, the pigs, or?
Pigs are actually supposed to be very smart. I think you are actually supposed to be able to train them and.
Yeah, it's not an issue of their intelligence. The dietary restriction has to do with they eat anything.
No, I'm just thinking of if I could have adopted one of those pigs. I think I could have trained it. But yes, that's a thing. How do I know it's not going to eat me one day? That's the only reason I don't have a bobcat. I can never 100% be sure it's not going to eat me.
That is the only reason that we do not currently own a bobcat.
Well, and the Carol Baskin thing. You shouldn't have them, whatever.
Devotional thought number 2. We'll move on. Yes, Carol Baskin's another. We'll have a whole. What was that show called? Tiger King.
Yeah.
We will have a whole Tiger King maybe miniseries after this. The second devotional thought is this guy becomes an amazing evangelist. He wants to follow Jesus. He wants to go with Jesus and follow his ministry, become the 13th disciple, and Jesus says no, and that's kind of heartbreaking to him. But he says it's because I have a specific ministry for you. And Jesus tells him to go and do two things, and this is really instructive. He says, "Tell others what the Lord has done for you, and the mercy that He's shown to you." That is two qualities of God. What God has done for you, that's His power, and how He's shown mercy to you. That is His undeserved love. And Jesus, remember, is the perfect embodiment. His cross and His resurrection is the perfect embodiment of mercy and power. And but basically, I think when it comes to, I think the application for this point too is, if you're going to be a good evangelist, it's two basic things. It's telling the amazing things that Jesus has done for you, and then also telling and sharing how undeserved of those good things you were.
Yeah.
I think that is a part of people's witnesses that when I hear really powerful witnessing accounts, that is a huge piece of it. God loves me and He's saved me. He died on the cross, He rose from the grave, and He saved me. And guess what? I was really tough to save. Look at the depths that He went to. And that is the piece that, like, people will talk about God's goodness, but they won't talk about their own badness or weakness. And that is something that does not exist in the Apostle Paul's testimony. He is very clear about sharing his weaknesses. The other early church leaders were all kind of notorious. Everybody knew about Peter's denial. Everybody, everybody heard about Peter's racism with the Jerusalem Council thing and what happened in Antioch. And so, like, they knew. And what it did is God becomes greater. When we're saved, God becomes greater to the degree that we can acknowledge we are weaker.
Yeah, that was so that was one of the great things that Adrian Gunn was always so good at. So there was a man in our congregation, a black man, who was going through our PSI program, like becoming a pastor. Like
Pastoral Studies Institute.
We have very few African American pastors in our church body, and we need more of that. And he's going through these studies, and he ended up dying of cancer, and it just seemed so crazy. Like, why? Like, he was clearly going to do like so many good things, and he was so excited about it. But I think you said at his funeral, like, you had spent so many hours with him, like, in and out of the hospital. And I think you said that, like, there was not a healthcare worker who Adrian didn't tell, like, what Jesus had done for him.
Yeah, one of the things I remember at his funeral, one of the things I said is he was so excited to get into, like, the pulpit and get into preaching and I said, one of the things that I told him, in his one of the final devotions that I did with him too, is I said, well, Adrian, your hospital bed has been a pulpit for the past 6 months, and because you've been proclaiming the goodness of God despite what you're going through, and Adrian was always really good about that. He would tell you where he'd been. He'd tell you he'd tell you what the Lord had done for him and how He had transformed him. And he was this incredible, like, miles and miles where I've been and where I've come to. And he's like this guy that I looked to in my life as, like, oh yeah, I should really be more like that, to that point. And so it's the transformative grace of God, but he's talking about the power of God and talking about the mercy of God specifically as it relates to you. Don't be afraid to share how good God is. Don't be afraid to share how weak you are, and your witness, like, proportionately becomes impactful accordingly. The third devotional thought is this little girl, Jairus' daughter. We're given the phrase, "The child is asleep," that Jesus says, and they laughed. The world laughed. Everybody else laughed. Imagine that everybody's here, like, at this essentially a funeral for her. They're gathering at the house. Jesus comes and comes with this positive, courageous attitude and says she's just asleep, and everybody just starts laughing at it. That's insane to think about. But that is, like, in some respects, it's a metaphor for how the world looks at what Jesus has to say. the world does not understand things that are spiritually discerned. And, maybe this is partially, maybe if I'm being too tough on them, maybe they're being hysterical here. Sometimes we laugh.
I think Jesus also makes people uncomfortable then and now.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's a reaction when you are uncomfortable.
Yes, he's enormously polarizing in what he says and who he is. But again, it's possible that they're just like reacting out of hysteria rather than just disrespect. But the way it's written, Mark records it as it sounds like disrespect. And remember, these are religious people. Jairus is a synagogue ruler. We're assuming the people that are gathered here at his house are his friends and family who are, highly religious synagogue attenders. But they still don't totally buy Jesus' divinity in all of this. And perhaps even the Lord's ability to do, have earthly interaction, like supernatural interaction with them. And I think the application then again for us today is we still clearly live in a secular society. Like if there's any debate or doubt about that, every statistic out there is suggesting our society is post-Christian and secularized, and probably was beyond or post-Christian long before everybody even realized it anyways. And therefore, we are absolutely influenced by kind of this anti-supernaturalistic bias of a materialistic world. I mentioned that in point 1, but again, it's this, here you see it here. Like people today read the story about the demon-possessed person, and they're like, I don't think so. And yet, right here, you see it with Jairus' friends at the household. No, she's just asleep. I will raise her from the grave. And they laugh at that. Like, no, nobody can possibly do that. God wouldn't do that. And so sure enough, Jesus proves him wrong and proves his divinity in the process. You have anything else you want to add on Mark chapter 5?
No, I feel like I probably said enough.
Okay. Would you like to close with prayer, or would you like me to?
No.
Okay.
I'm not capable of that right now.
Okay, I will. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to get back into the swing of our studies. Lord, let our testimonies be good. And by good, I mean not about us, but about you. In the sense that we testify to your goodness, and we testify honestly about our weaknesses. Lord, the Apostle Paul repeatedly said, when I am weak, then I am strong. And that's also true when it comes to our witness. When I'm willing to admit that I'm flawed, broken, sinful, and undeserving of your love, mercy, grace, and power, and yet I'm fully confident that I have a place in heaven prepared for by you, that I'm welcomed into the family, that I'm loved, accepted, and blessed on the basis of your grace. That, like, the dichotomy of those two things, my weakness and your strength, makes that witness so powerful. Help us to be really honest about that as Christians. You don't love us because we're lovable. You love us despite how often we are unlovable. And that makes you a really great, loving, powerful, and merciful God. Help us to preach that and live that very boldly. To your glory. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow for Mark chapter 6.